بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. So with the Fatiha, who worked that out? What's that? That's okay. Okay. Did you Google this? I'm just kidding. Go ahead. 7th is what? It's pretty close. Anybody else? Who tried to work it out? Not very many people. I thought you guys were going to do it. I said it was an assignment. Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, rahimahullah, he was one of the great scholars, 14th century. He actually died in a battle fighting the Spanish from the north. He was in Andalusia. He was a great scholar from what's now called Granada. Then it was called Granata. And he wrote several books, but probably his most famous book is called At-Tasyir li-Ulum at-Tanzil. And he has an introduction in it. Some of the introductions of the great tafsirs are the most extraordinary things that have been written on the Quran. But he wrote that introduction to the Quran, and he identified, the first thing, when you read a book, and the Quran is al-kitab, like you have, the Quran mentions Ahlul Kitab. Ahlul Kitab really are not the people of the book, so to speak, but really the people of the Bible. Because the Bible in Greek, al-Biblios, means the book. So Ahlul Kitab, al-Kitab is Arabic for al-Biblios, the Bible. So the people of the Bible, and those are the two dominant dispensations that the Quran recognizes. The other ones, there's obviously reference to the Suhuf of Ibrahim alayhi salam. There's reference to previous prophets, even some prophets that are not Semitic, that are indicated but not mentioned by name. There's also some Arab prophets that are mentioned. Salih, obviously, is and Hud are Arab prophets, ancient Arab prophets. But one of the things about in the introduction, Ibn Juzay says, like, what is the Quran? If you had a definition, like, how would you define the Quran? Naam. Yeah. What's that? Okay, so that's one way. Karam Allah. Yeah, next to you. Okay. So that's one definition. The word of Allah, Kalimatullah, Tammat Kalimatu Rabbika, Sidqan wa Adra. So the Quran is called Kalimat. A'udhu bi kalimati Allahi tamma. I seek refuge in the words of Allah. So that's one, the Kalam Allah. What's another? Okay, so that's the Quran means a recitation or the recital. Okay, it's called a Dhikrul Hakim. That's one of its names, the wise reminder. And reminders indicate what? What does a reminder indicate? Yeah, you already know something. I'm just reminding you. So that goes back to the covenant. إِذْ أَخَذَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says when He took His covenant. Anything else? All right, that's another, the last testament. The Old Testament, the New Testament, the last testament. The Furqan is a name. So you're giving the names. The Usuliyun, when they define the Quran, Al-Quranu, right? Al-Quranu munazzalun ala Muhammadi min ajl al-i'jazi wa al-ta'abbudi. That's a usuli definition. The Quran was revealed, so it's a revelation. It was revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so it's his revelation. Unlike the Injil that was revealed to Isa, so it's his revelation, or the Torah to Moses, so it's his revelation. And the reason is for i'jaz. In other words, it's a proof of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Quran, although it contains the message of Allah, it's also in a feedback loop. It's also the proof of the one who's bringing the Quran. So it's saying this Quran is so extraordinary and so impossible for people to bring the likes of it, that the person saying that it's from God must be true. Now, and then وَلِلتَّعَبُّدِ, and it's for worship. So it's a book in order to worship Allah. Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi says that the Quran is دعوة الحق دعوة الخلق إلى عبادة الحق. It's the invitation, it's creation's invitation to the worship of their Creator. That's his definition, the Quran. دعوة الخلق إلى عبادة الحق. It's the invitation that was given to humanity. يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم. O humanity, it's the first amr in the whole Quran. If you read the Quran from Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, or according to Imam Malik from Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, if you begin there and you go, the first amr in the Quran, Ya ayyuhan nas, u'budu rabbakum, worship your Lord. That's the first amr. What's the first prohibition? وَلَا تَجْعَلُوا لِلَّهِ أَنْدَادًا وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Don't set up substitutes for God. Don't set up substitutes for God. Andad are something in place of or like. Nid is similar to. So don't set up similarities to God. Something that you should be giving to God, don't give it to something else. So that's what he says. And then he says that the Quran then necessitates, given that it is an invitation to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's also a clarification of what the invitation is and what the worship is. So it's a clarification of those two things. And then he says that the invitation is to know your Lord and to invite you into a state of submission with Him, ibadah and Islam, istislam, to be in a state of submission with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, and then it gives you the reasons why you would do that, al-bawa'ith, those things that would encourage you to do that, which he categorizes as two, targhib wa tarhib. So you have things that are going to encourage you to do what you're being asked to do, and things that will discourage you from not doing what you're being asked to do or frighten you. So if you do this, this happens, like physics. You know, if I knock the glass, it'll tip over, a cause and effect. That there's metaphysics and physics. The Quran is not a book of physics. It's a book of metaphysics, in that it's talking really about what's underlying the physical world. It's talking about the real cause and effect that's going on. Not the illusion, not the appearance. It's talking, because appearances and reality are two different things. How things appear, and somebody can appear to be really healthy and they're really sick. You can look at somebody and think they're really strong and they're actually really weak. You can look at another person and think that they're pathetic and they're actually quite the opposite. So it's calling people to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says that the Quran then has the universal meaning, which is the da'wah of creation to the worship of the Creator, and then how that is put into details. And that's where the Quran becomes a study. It becomes a study. Quran is a book that was meant to be studied. The Sahabi used to study it. In fact, the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim, there's a hadith that says, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِّن بِيُوتِ اللَّهِ يَتْلُونَ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُم. They actually study it together. يَتَدَارَسُون is for musharaka in sarf. In morphology, it's for something that is done in a group, something that is done together. يَتَدَارَسُونَهُ. It's not like, you could have a mudarris and you could have, like a teacher and then people that are learning. That's one way to do it. The Quran, in my experience, the best way to read the Quran is with a group of people. You study it. And you can do that. You don't even have to, it's good to have a basis for what you're doing. Arabic is the prerequisite. But even in learning Arabic, you can acquire Arabic through the Quran and studying the Quran. Arabic can be a means by which you actually come to learn the Quran. Quranic Arabic is not difficult. There's less than 1,800 roots in the Quran, that's all. 1,800. It's about 1,720 roots in the Quran. That's all you have to learn. And then you learn morphology is basic. There's about 10 permutations. There's 15 generally, but 10 that are used. The 5 of them, you won't even find them in the Quran. So there's 10 permutations, and you learn each permutation has 5 or 6 possibilities. They're all the same pattern, so once you learn it, it's very simple. Darasa yadrusu fahuwa darisun, darsan fahuwa madrus, like that. Darrasa yudarrisu tadrisan, mudarrasan, like that. Darasa yudarisu mudarasatan fahuwa mudarisun, tadarasa yatadarasu tadarusan. And it's not hard. Like anybody can learn these things in a couple of weeks if they put their mind to it. And then the patterns are all there in the Quran because it's a book that reveals itself for people that really exert some effort. If you don't exert effort, Imam al-Junayd said this whole religion is based on mujahada. This religion won't give you anything without some kind of struggle. Mujahada won't give you anything. So then he says that if you detail the meanings of the Quran, so the general meaning is this invitation, but if you detail it, you'll find 7 meanings. Each one of the verses falls under these categories. The first one is ilm al-rububiyyah, like our sister said, learning about God. So, and you can look at it, Ibn Taymiyyah categorized uluhiyyah and rububiyyah. A lot of ulama have condemned that demarcation. He was the first one to make that distinction between this idea of having 2 tawheeds, tawheed al-uluhiyyah and tawheed al-rububiyyah, and he's pretty much been refuted. To be honest with you, Ibn Taymiyyah was a giant. He was a brilliant scholar. He was a great man, and he was a master of the Islamic sciences. But like all scholars, he had his mistakes, and this idea of taking him and that it's impossible for him to make a mistake is a very weird thing that some modern people, for some reason or another, have really fallen into. And then all the other ulama are obviously wrong because Ibn Taymiyyah said one thing and they all said another thing. You always should err on the side of when you have 100 physicists saying one thing that, cold fusion isn't possible, and you have one physicist saying, no, it's possible. The likelihood that the 100 are right, it's not a set in stone rule. That one guy could be the right guy, so that's undeniable. But generally, the rule is go with the majority of scholars. And the Prophet ﷺ indicated that with his community. Yadullahi ma'al jama'a. Allah is with the group. The group orthodoxy is the path of the jama'ah. That's why they're called Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. It's the path of the group. So when the group agrees on something and it becomes tradition and it's handed down through what's called talaqi, that is generally the orthodox position. But all great scholars have their idiosyncrasies. Imam al-Ghazali has his idiosyncrasy. I mean, that's the nature of genius. Genius is never going to go along with the group program 100%, or else they wouldn't be geniuses. They always have their own way of viewing things, and sometimes they add that they really do add something to the discourse, and sometimes their brilliance has pitfalls, so they end up. I mean, some of the most brilliant scholars in early Islam were deviants, but undeniably geniuses. I mean, if you read them, you can't. But they were wrong. And that's why it's a great benefit to have a magisterium. I mean, the Catholics call it the magisterium. You know, they have the Catholics have like a synod, like the Jews. You know, you have a group that comes together and they debate these things. In Islam, it's not as clear cut, but the same effect happened. You know, the ulama, and that's why, you know, you can have somebody like Imam Ilyas studied in a Deoband tradition in England, right? Is that where you studied? England, yeah. But like, what did you study? What was your basic Arabic text? Yeah, for Nahu. Al-Kafi, Hidayatul Nahu. So, and like you learned the fa'il and the maf'ul and the mansubat and majrur, right? It's all the same stuff. So I studied with West Africans and North Africans. If we sat down and we talked about daraba Zaydun Amran, we'll come to the same conclusions about that sentence. You know, we might debate on why he hit him, you know, the unanswered question. But we won't debate on daraba being a fi'l madi mabni al al-fath. We won't debate on Zaydun being the fa'il, right? Alamatu raf'ihi al-dhamma al-zahira fi akhir. I mean, we're not going to debate about those things because those things, those are knowledges that are passed on. And so you have this extraordinary corpus of body of knowledge that was passed on to our scholastic in our scholastic tradition from one generation to another, and you become a link in that chain because your teacher is a link, and then he links you in whatever he teaches you. So if you study Nahw and Sarf, you're in that link back to the people that started Nahw and Sarf. But ultimately, where does Nahw and Sarf come from? Where does it come from? It comes from the Quran. There's no book before the Quran. The Arabs had no book. There's no Homer in Arabic, you know, Omar. there's no Iliad or Odyssey, really, in Arabic. They had poetry, but there was no book. And so when you hear somebody like, they had that poor man who ended up trying to burn down the apartment building. He was a Christian preacher from an Arab country that made fun of the Quran. Do people remember? He debated Ahmed Didat. Anyway, we'll veil his name. But he debated Ahmed Didat, and one of his arguments was the Quran has bad grammar in it. Right? Like he said, it says, Ithna ashar asbatan. And he says, if you go over 10, it should be singular, so it should be Ithna ashar sibta. Right? So he said there's a mistake in the Quran. Quran created the Arabic language. The Quran defines anything the Quran says, it becomes a qaida. Even the Christian Arabs accept that. And that asbatan is not a tamyiz adadi of ithna ashar. It's a badal. It's a badal in grammar. So he didn't even know Arabic grammar, and he's criticizing the basis of Arabic grammar. But his people, when they attack the Quran, wallahi, they only display their ignorance. When they attack the Quran, you can argue that you don't believe in revelation, you can do all these things, but when you attack things like the rhetoric of the Quran, saying that it has poor, the Quran, this is what Al-Baqallani in his I'jaz al-Quran, Al-Baqallani took, and he was a master of Arabic, he took all of the previous poets, the great poets of Arabia. Imr al-Qais is one of the great poets of Arabia. His mu'allaqa was hung in the Kaaba according to tradition. But Imr al-Qais has weak lines in poetry. They can be rhetorically parsed and shown to be weak lines. Like there's a saying in English, even Homer nods. Sometimes Homer nods. Like the Iliad is a great classic, but the second chapter, which is where he categorizes the ships, goes on and on about these ships and that ship and this ship and the other ship. It's a boring chapter. It's hard to get through that chapter. A lot of people, they skip chapter 2 in the Iliad. But hence, even Homer nods. Now, my father, who taught Homer, argues that's one of the most interesting chapters of the Quran. So there's always debate about these type of things. But the point is, Shakespeare waxes melodramatic. Right? He's a great playwright of comedy and tragedy, but Shakespeare falls into melodrama, which is it's weak. And he's got some silly lines in there every once in a while. I mean, Shakespeare, hey nani nani, it's kind of gets pretty, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some Shakespearean scholars that would be hitting me over the head with a skillet right now. But again, that's lavish worship of authorities and things like that. But Shakespeare has his weaker plays. I mean, there's things that are contrived in Shakespeare. Every once in a while you're reading them, it's a little hard to, the plots, there's some contrivance in the plots, things like that. All literature falls into that category. So he shows how every single Arab poet from these great poets had weak lines. They're just weak. They're poorly produced lines of poetry. But he argues for anyone who's a master of rhetoric. I mean, you have to be a master, and it's not that hard. Rhetoric's one of the easier subjects. It takes a little while to learn, but once you learn it, you know what type of rhetorical devices are being used. He argues that you cannot find any verse in the Quran that can be improved rhetorically. None. You take any verse in the Quran and you try to say the same thing with, you have what's called a line editor. A line editor, they polish the syntax of a paper. So somebody can say, give you a line or something, you read a book. And I read books all the time, and I'm just like, I'm editing, because there's so many bad writers now. Every once in a while you read a book and it's like, wow, really well-written book from modern writers, but it doesn't happen that often. There's always ways you think you can improve the writing if you enjoy good writing. He argues that there's not one verse in the Quran that you can do that, not one. And that's a challenge, it's a rhetorical challenge to people. Produce the likes of this book. Produce the likes of it. Now, that only works for people that actually know Arabic. If you don't know Arabic, and most Arabs, most Arabs, Quran, it's mu'jiza, and they don't know Arabic. They know their modern dialects and things, but they haven't studied Arabic. They haven't, Quran moves people, but I've seen Ajam moved a lot more than a lot of Arab audiences, and they don't even understand it. You see these Pakistanis that are all weeping, and they don't know what it means, but they know it's God's word. So it's Iman that's moving their hearts. It's not so much the meanings themselves, but the meaning of that thing itself is what's moving them. So you can understand the meanings, and they don't move you, because the meaning itself hasn't moved you. Now, so he says, people say I'm hard on the Arabs, and I am hard on the Arabs because I expect so much more from the Arabs. That's the only reason. Yeah, that's the only reason. I know that if Omar ibn al-Khattab was around and he saw the Arabs right now, you think he'd be easy on the Arabs? But love of Arabs is from faith. حب العرب من الإيمان. And sometimes it's that you love people that you're upset about their state. It's not contempt. It's quite the opposite. It's from love that emanates. It's just like, It's only the hukam, you're right, of course. Yeah, the Arabs are all, it's always the hukam, I forget. Not you, Mazen, I exclude you. No, most of my teachers were Arabs. I have teachers from every single Arab country in the Arab world. Every single one. I have a teacher from one of the Arab countries. So, and my teachers were amazing. They were great. But they're ulu baqiyah. They're the people of constancy. The Quran says, فَلَوْلَا كَانَ مِنَ الْقُرُونِ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ أُولُو بَقِيَّةٍ يَنْهَوْنَ عَلَى الْفَسَادِ. Would that there were only more of those people of constancy from those previous generations that were destroyed, that told people you should be better than what you're doing. You should be doing better. So anyway, that's just the only reason I point that out is because that critique is, I hear that critique from people, and it's just I don't think it's a fair critique. I really don't. So, but anyway, having said that, I mean, for somebody that spent their entire adult life like studying Arabic and reading Arabic literature and spending a good deal of my life, probably over half of my adult life, been in company of Arabs. So this idea that I have something against the Arabs is absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, I'm not going to convince anybody, and I'm not trying to convince anybody, maybe just myself. So, where were we? Yeah, we were on number 1. Rububiyyah. We were talking about Ibn Taymiyyah and his division of Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah and Rububiyyah. So, most of the scholars, in fact, almost all of them, except for a handful, rejected that division. Of this idea that there was 2 tawheeds. Because if everybody's in agreement on tawheed al-rububiyyah, then there would be no meaning to the fact that in the grave the question that you're asked is man rabbuka, who's your Lord? So the idea that tawheed al-rububiyyah is agreed upon and tawheed al-uluhiyyah is the thing that we differ with the mushrikeen, that they agree in the rububiyyah of God, but they don't accept His uluhiyyah. They give it to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the category of rububiyyah is when he's talking about it, it means about God, the uluhiyyah, the rububiyyah. So the murabbi is the one that nurtures. It nurtures. It brings to fruition. It's the one that khalaqa kulli shay'in, ata kulli shay'in khalqa, gave everything its creation and then guided it to fulfill its purpose. That's the Rabb. And then the second category that he says is in the Quran is the nubuwat, things that relate to prophets and what is prophecy and being given prophecy. A means of communicating, the way God communicates to His creation through prophets. The prophets, if you look at this room, it has a ceiling. And you can look at our intellects like ceilings. People have different levels of understanding. So some people have low ceilings. Those are called low brows. I'm just kidding. The Arabs actually have that same term, low brow. Because in physiognomy, they actually think people with low brows were not as intelligent as people with high brows. So in Europe, they used to pluck the hair. Like that's why you see all those women with the like Queen Elizabeth. She wasn't bald. It's literally, that was a belief that you had more intelligence if you had a high brow. So the Arabs call that the asla is a high brow, and the agham is a low brow. And Imam Malik said, whatever you do, don't marry agham, somebody who's got a low brow. Imam Malik had a very high brow. He was asla. So that was a belief of the Arabs in like many other peoples. But the intellect has limits. Now, the most brilliant people of intellect might have very high ceilings, but the prophets the ceiling it's open. So they have this ability to see the celestial realm. So when they describe, like we're looking up and we just see the ceiling, but somebody's telling us, no, there's actually something beyond this ceiling, and it's it's got stars and constellations. And if you've been in this room your entire life and you've never been outside and this is all you know, you could say, you're crazy. That person's insane. And that's what some people do. They say, Majnun, he's crazy. But if you've known that person to be truthful all their life and they got out somehow, and then they came back in and they said, I got out of this room. There's actually a door out. It closed now, but it was open for a moment and I went out and there's a whole world out there. Then you might say, maybe it's true what he said. I mean, he's never lied about anything before. Why would he lie about that? So that nubuwat are this idea that Allah communicates with people, opens up this communication, and then that communication is in turn given to the people, and they respond in one of those two ways. He's a liar, he's insane, he's crazy, or it makes sense. I always thought there might be more to this thing than just this room we're in, right? I mean, this is the way some people are. There's people that come to conclusions. Hamza radiallahu anhu said that when he used to be out hunting, he felt tawheed. Abu Dharr al-Ghifari also told the Prophet ﷺ that he used to bow down, prostrate to God before he heard about Islam. Somebody asked him, which direction did you pray to? And he said, wherever my heart told me to. So he was on a fitrah. And there are people like that have this fitrah understanding of reality. And then the third category is the category of ma'ad. That not only is there a resurrection, but there's an accounting. Just like you have accounting in this world, muhasaba, there's an accounting in the next world. So there's a hashar, a nashar, a hisab, and then the judgment. And then so that's the third. And then the fourth is the ahkam. And those are the things that relate to either your body, the rules that relate to your body. Like there's a physical prayer. You have to do wudu. You have to do ghusl. Those are ahkam that relate, al-ahkam al-badaniyah. And then you have ahkam al-maliyah, which relate to wealth. لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل. Don't eat wealth or consume wealth that is unjustly done. And then you have to pay zakat. الذين هم لزكاتهم فاعلون. The people that pay their zakat. And then you have to also encourage to give charity. الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء. When things are good and when things are bad, they still give out. ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. Those are all the ahkam that relate to mal. So you have the ahkam al-maliyah, ahkam al-badaniyah, and then you have the ahkam al-qalbiyah, the rules that relate to your heart, like لا تصعر خدك. Don't be arrogant with people. Don't elevate yourself above other people. Don't have bad opinion of people. Inna ba'd al-dhanni ithmun. Sometimes thinking suspicion is a type of sinfulness. That's something in the heart. Dhann, suspicion is in the heart. And yet Allah is telling us, don't suspect people. وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا. Don't hunt it out. If you're suspicious, don't go and try to find out if it's true or not. So those are the ahkam. And then you have the wa'ad, the promise. What happens if you fulfill those ahkam? That's the fifth. And then the sixth is the wa'id, which is the threat. That if you do not do these things, then these things happen. And then the seventh are the qasas. Those are the stories that will express these other meanings in history. And Quran is sacred history. It's important to note that Quran is sacred history. So when you look at the ahkam of rububiyyah, verses that deal with sun, moon, wind, all those type things, rivers, they're going to have. So if we look at the Quran, if you look, if you look at any verse in the Quran, وَقُلْ عِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنزَغُ بَيْنَهُمْ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. So, what type of verse is that? Say to my servants that they should speak in a beautiful way, and they should know that shaitan sows dissension amongst them, and shaitan is a clear and manifest enemy for human beings. So, that first one, say to my slaves they should speak in a beautiful way. What's that? It's hukum, right? It's a type of judgment because we're being told to do something. And then, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنْزَغُ بَيْنَهُمْ. Shaitan is a, he's somebody that sows dissension amongst you. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. What does that relate to? There's definitely a type, there's a warning in there. All right, so it is a warning not to listen to shaitan. And then, رَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِكُمْ إِنْ يَشَاء يَرْحَمْكُمْ أَوْ إِنْ يَشَاء يُعَذِّبْكُمْ وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَكِيلًا. So your Lord knows about you. He is better, more knowledgeable about you. And if He wants, He'll forgive you. And if He wants, He'll punish you. And we did not send you as somebody who's going to be responsible for them. So what's that? What type of verse is that? What type of verse? It's got the ma'ad in there, right? But it's also really about rububiyyah, isn't it? Because it's telling us about the nature of Allah. That if He wants, He'll do this, and if He wants, He'll do that. So there's ma'ad in there because you have the wa'ad and the wa'id, the rahmah and the adab are there. But there's also telling us about the nature. And then also, we didn't send you as a wakila. That's telling us about nubuwah, that prophets are not, in the end, responsible for what people do, even their own followers, if they don't follow them properly. You can't blame a prophet for the mistakes of his people. وَرَبُّكَ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلَقَدْ فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَ النَّبِيِّينَ عَلَى بَعْضٍ وَآتَيْنَا دَاوُودَ زَبُورًا. So, and your Lord knows of whomsoever is in the heavens and the earth. Your Lord knows about it. And we have preferred some of the prophets over others, and we gave Dawood the Psalms. So, what's going on there? There's rububiyyah, and there's nabuwah, and there's qasas, right? So you've got all three there. So anyway, you can go through and see every verse in the Quran is going to have one of those 7 meanings or more than one of those 7. Now, if we look at Fatiha, which is the Fatiha is the nuskha mukhtasara of the whole Quran. It's the summation of the entire Quran. Malik's version is Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. But either way, if you there's a difference of how they divide these ayahs. Some put Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen as one ayah, and then they split the down below. There's a split. So it just depends on which verse you're doing. So some of them don't split صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, whereas Malik split those. So you'll find there's 7 verses which begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen is the first verse. So Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen is rububiyyah, right? Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is rububiyyah. Maliki Yawmiddin, it's ma'ad and rububiyyah, right? But it's ma'ad. Iyaka na'budu is ahkam, ibadah. Wa iyaka nasta'een, ahkam. Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim. Yeah, the sirat al-mustaqim is the way, sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim is the way of the prophets, right? And then غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. So is the qasas and also the wa'id, right? Because you get the ghadab, so the Jews and the Christians and other peoples that have gone astray. And it's also sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim. There is a valid tafsir that refers to the Jews and the Christians. So people that say that the last two verses are the Jews and the Christians, no, those are Jews and Christians that deviated. They're not Jews and Christians. So it's wrong to put that in there. Like, unfortunately, we have a copy, a translation of the Quran that actually has غير المغضوب عليهم, the Jews, ولا الضالين, the Christians, and they've actually put it in there as if it's from the Quran. And so people reading that think that in our every day in our prayer, we're asking God not to make us like Jews or Christians, but it's not. We want to be like the Jews and Christians who were rightly guided. Because there were Jews and Christians where we believe in their revelation, and the Prophet uses many examples of righteous Jews and Christians in the hadith literature. There are many examples of Jews and Christians that were upright and good people. And in fact, when the Prophet ﷺ, they asked him to punish, to make dua against the people in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Innakum qawmun tasta'jilun." You're trying to hurry things up too quickly. He said the people before you, and he meant the Christians. He said they used to be sawed in half, and they wouldn't give up their faith. They used to be sawed in half, tortured. And so what he was saying is, look, it's not so bad compared to what the Christians got for their belief. The way they're treating us in Mecca is not as bad as the way the Christians were treated in that early period when they were persecuted by the Romans. So that's important to know. So anyway, that was for people that are interested in that methodology. That is one way. There are other methodologies. I mean, Imam al-Ghazali has his own methodology of studying the Quran, which is in the Jawahir al-Quran, which is an amazing text. And he gives 6 types of verses in there that are also a very interesting way to look. I mean, he felt that the Quran had jewels and pearls, and that if you understood the jewels and pearls, then you were able to that there were a core set of verses in the Quran that were the jewels and pearls. If you understood those, all the other verses were really embellishing and enhancing those core meanings, but they were the same essential truths. And so he wrote a book to identify those so that you could study the Quran from that perspective. But there are different ways to study the Quran, and I would encourage creating groups, Quranic study groups. I think that our community should do that. We read the Quran as a devotional practice. Like in Ramadan, people read the Quran, they do a khatam. Wallahi, people need to start studying the Quran and really learning the Quran and what these things mean and how they should change our lives and how they should impact us, so that when we read the Quran, it's actually affecting us. You can do khatam again and again and again, but if you don't study the Quran, the purpose of reading the Quran is أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Aren't they thinking about this book? Or are their hearts sealed from being able to penetrate its meanings? And the Quran, it's like kalbahari, it's like the ocean. It's just wave after wave of meaning. And the meanings don't stop. Even for the same verses, you can read, mulk for years and years and years, and you'll find things in there that you never saw before. Right? So to go back to the where we were last night in the other thing, that was a little excursion on the Quran, just to encourage all of us. Ramadan's coming up, to encourage us to study the Quran. إياك أن تهتم بالأرزاق لأنها في ضمان الخلاق. So he warned us about being obsessed with provision, having hum about provision, being fearful of provision. That's one of the things that happens in our culture, is that there's a lot of fear of provision, which is a disease of the heart. You should have certainty that your Lord created you and will provide for you. He's going to provide for you. And then he says, وَخَصَّةً لَيْسَ شَيْءٌ يُوجَدُ فَوْقَهُمَا مِنَ الْخَيْرَاتِ يُحْمَدُ حُسْنُ ظَنٍ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ بِالْعِبَادِ فَكُنْهُمَا وَجَنِّبَنَّ لِلْعِنَادِ. That there are two qualities that you can't find anything over them that is more praiseworthy from all the good things in the world. حُسْنُ ظَنٍ بِاللَّهِ, having a good opinion of Allah. And we talked about that. I talked about that yesterday and the day before. أنا عند ظن عبدي بي فليظن بي ما شاء. I'm in the opinion of my servant, so let him think whatever he wants. You know, the Quran, من وجد خيرا فليحمد الله ومن وجد غير ذلك فلا يلومن إلا نفسه. Whoever finds good, let him thank God. But whoever finds other than that, let him blame only himself. People don't reflect on the meaning of that hadith. If you're finding other than good in your life, then your faith is it's messed up. Because everything is good for the believer. عَجَبًا لِأَمْرَ الْمُؤْمِنِ فَإِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلُّهُ لَهُ خَيْرٌ. How wondrous is the affair of the believer. All of his affair is good, or her affair. That's the hadith. Suhaib al-Rumi relates. In atahu Allahu shakar. Right? If God gives him, he's patient. وَإِنْ ابْتَلَاهُ صَبَرٌ. And if he tries him, if he gives him, he's grateful. If he tries him, he's patient. وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ لِأَحَدٍ إِلَّا الْمُؤْمِنِ. وَلَيْسَ ذَلِكَ لِأَحَدٍ إِلَّا الْمُؤْمِنِ. And that, nobody has that state except a believer. Somebody who has belief. That when they get afflicted, mashallah, قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. This is Allah. Because Allah is doing everything. And so what he's saying is, have a good opinion of Allah. Have a good opinion of creation, because the creation, لا يتحرك إلا بإرادة الله. أقام العباد فيما أراد. That creation can't do anything except what Allah allows them to do. If they all either استمعوا, right? If all of them استمعوا ليصيبك, you know, and they want to harm you, and Allah didn't decree that they could harm you, you wouldn't be harmed. And if they all got together to help you and prevent something from afflicting you that Allah had decreed would afflict you, they can't do it. رُفِعَتِ الْأَقْلَامِ. You know, the pens have been lifted. The ink is dry. So anything that happens to you, it's good. You know, they say it's all good. Seriously, whoever started saying that somewhere, it's probably a Muslim in the ghettos of America. It's all good. Like they say in the hood. You know, it's all good. That's true. What they're saying, it's true. It's all good. Because for the believer, it is all good. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said, if you find other than good, only blame yourself, because you're not seeing the good. It's your vision this doesn't mean and this is where, you know, our religion is a religion of intellect. It's not a dummies religion, despite Islam for dummies. You know, it's not a dummies religion. The Quran describes the people who understand as ulil absar, you know, ulil albab, you know, ulil nuha, people of intellect, people that have intelligence. People, this is a religion of intelligence. So it's important to understand that this doesn't mean, you know, as the tanks are rolling in and taking over your country, it's all good. You know, but when you resist nonetheless with that knowledge. So it doesn't mean you don't change what's out there. You don't change what's wrong in the world, because there are wrongs in the world that need to be righted. There's wars that need to be waged. There's things that need to be changed. That's all true. But your inward understanding is always rooted in this. It's either a tribulation from Allah or it's a blessing from Allah. It's one or the other. So injustice in the world is a tribulation from who? From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't mean that those people who are doing it, perpetrating it, aren't responsible. They are, but it's Allah who's enabled them. Had Allah wanted, He would have stopped them. So if you don't have that knowledge, your tawheed is deficient. It's incorrect. And that's why you only have yourself to blame, because you haven't learned your religion. If you're seeing other than good, you haven't learned your religion. Because the Quran says, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. He's going to test you. وَجَعَلْنَا بَعْضُكُمْ لِبَعْضٍ فِتْنَةً. We made some of you a tribulation for others. أَتَصْبِرُونَ. Will you show forbearance? Will you be patient? Allah made some of you a tribulation for others. So your family could be your tribulation. Right? It could be your tribulation. Your family, your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters. They could be your tribulation. Will you show patience? Like the man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, عندي أخي أصيره يقطعني أعطيه يمنعني وواصره. Right? I give, he doesn't give me. I maintain my kinship bonds with me, he severs me. أحسن إليه يسيء إلي. I do good to him, he does wrong to me. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah is with you as long as you continue like that. In other words, you're the one that God's going to help. Because you're doing the right thing, irrespective of what their response is. It doesn't matter. And that's why Muslims don't have a problem saying they're sorry. Because sometimes you'll do it just to rectify things. Because your ego is not so big that it's like, I'm not going to say, he has to say he's sorry. I'm not going to say I'm sorry. He's the one that's wrong. She's the one that's wrong. It's her fault. And that's just the cycle. It just goes on and on and on. And it's just, it's exhausting. Sometimes that's all it needs. You just say, you know what? I apologize if I did anything wrong. That's the way, and it's so interesting. You know, somebody in Morocco, one of the teachers there, he had this faqih. You know, he's a scholar of just outward knowledge, and he wasn't interested in tazkiyah and he said, you know, the end of your path, the beginning of our path is better than the end of your path. In other words, the end of outward knowledge, the beginning of this path is better than the end of your path. And he said, I don't believe that. He said, well, I'll show you. He said, come tomorrow after Asr and visit me. And he had his students, and he said, when this faqih is going to come in, and when he greets you, don't reply, don't say anything. Don't reply to him. So he comes in, and he says, Assalamu alaikum. Nobody says anything. He says, Assalamu alaikum. Nobody says anything. He says, Assalamu alaikum. Nobody says anything. He says, Antum juhal, a bunch of ignorant people. Did you know to say salam is mandub, but to respond to it is wajib? Didn't you know that? So the sheikh called him over, he sat him down. He said, listen. He said, I have a man, he just became a student last week. He's going to come in. I don't want you to say salam to him. I don't want anybody to say salam to him. I just want to show you something. So the man comes in. He says, Salam alaikum. Nobody says anything. He says, Salam alaikum. Nobody says anything. He says, Salam alaikum. Nobody says anything. He says, Astaghfirullah. Please forgive me. Did I offend anybody? Wallahi, forgive me if I did anything wrong. And that's what he said. It's like the beginning of that path better than the end of the other path. If it's always pointing outside yourself. And there's a lot of people, that's just where they're at. The blame game. But if you read the Quran, go through the Quran, and you look who blames in the Quran. Just look at the people that blame. and then look at the people that blame themselves. That's a good exercise. Go through the whole Quran and look at the people that blame others and look at the people. Shaitan blames God. Bima aghwaytani. Shaitan's like literally blaming God. Adam alayhi salam could have said, you tricked me, you put that tree there, and then you sent Iblis, and I thought he was actually a friend, and he could have done that. Really, if you think about it. He could have just, it's not fair what you did. That was the best tree in the whole place. That fruit looked better than any other fruit in the whole, he could have done that. But he wouldn't have been the Khalifa. He didn't. He said, I wronged myself. Yunus, same thing. When he's in the belly of the whale, you sent me to those ridiculous people. You know, in Nineveh, I tried, everything I did, they were so stupid. It was all their fault. I made it all clear. He could have said that. Really, if you think about it. Because there's lots of people, that's their response to the same type thing. But none of them do that. The Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Ta'if, he could have done the same thing. Look at these people. Smash them between mountains. Look what they've done to your beloved. Ashku ilayka dha'fi. I complain to you my weakness. Wahawani ala nas. He didn't say ihanatan nas. I'm complaining to you their treatment of me. He said, I'm complaining to you wahawani ala nas. My insignificance. My insignificance. He didn't say their humiliation or their mistreatment. My insignificance. Hawani ala nas. He complained that he was so insignificant to them. وَقِلَّةَ حِيلَتِي. And that I have no strategy. I tried to do this. I thought coming here would help. I don't have anything left. That's what he said. إِلَى مَنْ تَكِلُنِي. Who are you going to send me to? إِلَى عَدُوٍ يَتَجَهَّمُنِي. To some enemy that treats me terribly. أو غريب لا يعرفوني, or some stranger that doesn't know who I am. إذا لم يكن سخطك علي فلا أبالي. As long as you're not upset with me, I don't mind. I don't mind. It's an amazing statement. So, do you want to share? Because now I'm interested. People, is there a joke? Somebody was laughing. The difference between nubuwat and qasas. The difference between nubuwat and qasas is they're related, obviously, but the nubuwat don't necessarily involve prophets alone. In the Quran, there's things that are going on as well with other people of what they did, but ultimately it's how they respond to prophets and things like that. So there's qualities that are mentioned about arrogance and things like that. So we learn from the previous people of what destroyed them, their profligacy, their extravagance, their all those types of things that create problems. But nubuwwah is in the Quran is about who they are and how we should respond to them. So, and then obviously the Quran talks about revelation and sending revelation to people, but then it gives us specific examples. So the qasas of the Anbiya are in the Quran. Then there's the qasas of Fir'aun. Like we go into the inner circle of Fir'aun. We hear them talking, what they think, how they're responding to things. The believer in the Ali Fir'aun. How do you define sacred history? Sacred history does not have necessarily any historical evidence by a historian. I wouldn't use the word mythology just because people misunderstand it, but mythology can be history as well. It's just not
historical in the sense we don't have records. We don't. Moses, alayhi salam, there are people that argue that he never existed. Now, we don't believe that, but there are historians that argue that. There are historians that argue that Jesus did not exist. There are very few historical references to Jesus outside of sacred tradition. So that's the point of sacred history. Sacred history comes in Revelation. Nobody was there when God was talking to the angels and telling them to bow down to Adam. For somebody like Richard Dawkins, that is pure mythology. So a secular atheist or agnostic would just consider that that's pure mythology. For us, we believe it did happen. I mean, obviously, there are people that think these things aren't literal, and there are Muslims that believe that, and that it's not necessarily kufr as long as they don't deny these things altogether. But asulul kalam al-haqiqa, the basis of all languages is literal initially, unless there's some reason to go to a metaphorical interpretation. But whenever you see the anthropomorphic aspects of the Quranic narratives, you have to free your mind from that. I mean, there's very simple people that think that these are like the majalis of a king with people in front of them, and you have to get that out of your mind when you think about God, because God, kullu ma khatara bi barika fallahu khilafu dhalika. I mean, that's the qaida. Anything that occurs to your mind, God is other than that. So you can't imagine, but there are approximations. I mean, Allah uses a language. You know, Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said, "Laysa fil jannati min ad-dunya illa al-asma." The only thing that paradise and this world share are the names. That's it. There was a Syrian who had a dream. He went to Sheikh Hisham Barhani. He was Sheikh Hisham. He said, I dreamed I was eating macaroni in paradise. You know, and in Arabic it's macarona. He said it wasn't macarona, it was maqara'na. It wasn't macarona, you know, it wasn't macaroni, it was what we read, ma qara'na. You know, min al-inab, rumman. So that's what I mean by sacred history. It's, Khalid Blankenship, who's one of the most extraordinary intellects and historians that I've ever met in my life. I mean, he is a historical phenomenon in terms of his, or he is a phenomenon of historical knowledge. But he was asked to do a program on history in the Quran, and what he found was that there wasn't anything in the Quran outside of the references to seerah and things that really could be proven historically. But he said what was interesting, unlike the Bible, they couldn't be disproven either. Like there are things in the Bible that are just historically inaccurate that have been shown. If you read Ehrman's books, or misquoting Jesus, or if you read, I mean, he's popularizing a lot of the German scholarship of the late 19th, early 20th century, where they really criticized a lot of what was in the Bible because it was just inaccurate. This is last night in the Principles of Tasawwuf. You mentioned different types of ways the self is referred to. Well, just that Ibn Ajiba in his commentary on the Hikam says, Nafs, Qalb, Ruh, Fu'ad, Sir. These are all ways of referring to the same thing from different aspects. So the Aql is the soul when it's directed towards intelligibles, towards the ma'qulat. You call it the aql. It's consciousness. I mean, consciousness is the great bugbear of materialists, because there's no material proof for consciousness. They can't reduce consciousness. There's a lot of attempts, but don't believe them ever when they say, oh, consciousness is just chemical exchanges in the body or something. Trust me, They don't even know. I mean, there's such a strong argument for realist philosophy, right? Because there's so many things. People will say to you, everything you know is through sensory perception. This is kind of a post-enlightenment modern man. Everything you know, there's nothing you can know. The mind is tabula rasa. There was nothing on it before you came into the world. Everything you've acquired is through sense perception. I mean, this is a modernist, materialistic argument. But these are fallacies. They're lies that have been perpetrated on modern people by sophists. And the sophists were the same type people that the ancients were dealing with. For instance, there is nothing in the world, nothing that indicates categories. Nothing. Categories are a complete creation of the mind. There's nothing in the world that says there's something, there's trees. There's nothing in the world that says there's trees. If you go out there and show me an oak tree, that's a name, but that thing, that is a unique thing. There's nothing, there's no other oak on the whole planet. And if you went and examined every single oak on the planet, you will find that they're different from that oak. Just like every human being is different from every other human being. Look at all the people in this room. Nobody's the same. We resemble each other. There's certain semblances. That's true. But to categorize us, the mind did that. The mind did that. Numbers don't exist in the world. There's two. Where did two come from? Well, there's two. There's 1, 2. And then plus 1 is 3. 1, 2, 3. The mind did that. That's not in the world. The mind put them together. And so mathematics is something that, where did that come from? Where did that ability to do that come from? And this is why Einstein said the only thing to him that was incomprehensible about the world was its comprehensibility. Why are we able to discern all this meaning? How did Newton figure out the universal law of gravity? How did he do that? Where was that? To take an apple falling and to universalize an individual event. The mind did that. That wasn't in the world. His mind did that. So all of these, this modern madness of denying at least the possibility of the mind being outside of this world. That the mind, that consciousness itself is not a material thing. It's an immaterial thing. Just even that possibility, that is a rational proposition. It's not irrational. So this argument that somehow it's irrational, they're lying. That's all they're doing. They're lying. It's just they have chosen to side on materialism, not on spiritualism, or that there is something outside of the material. That's their choice, and that's fine. You made that choice, and you have to live with that choice. And if you die and there is an afterlife, you're going to have to deal with that choice also. But those people that choose the other view have, from our perspective, more rational proofs, because this idea that this, just popped into existence, just popped in, like my hand wasn't designed, and then you're going to tell me, well, it was a selfish gene. Selfish gene? Selfish gene? Like, where did it get its selfishness from? So the gene has a personality, and it happens to be a selfish personality as opposed to an altruistic gene? Really? I mean, think about just how they talk about, and then natural selection did this. I've read their books, and then natural selection seems to just do a lot of things that it wants to do. Where did it get that will to do things? Where did it get the will? Where did the irada come from? Seriously, don't be fooled by sophistry and by language and by, think about these things at a deeper level. And some of you that are in universities, these people they've been brainwashed. They've been trained in certain ways of thinking, and it becomes really difficult for them to see. But if you've had, great teachers, or if you've read the great teachers of the past, these people weren't stupid people. Newton believed in an afterlife. He wasn't a stupid person. Isaac Newton wrote a commentary on the Bible. And half of their science is based on his insights. Really, without Newton, this modern world doesn't even exist. Leibniz believed in God. That's where they got their calculus from to deny God. So this idea somehow that you're an idiot to believe these things, and should we study the Quran with somebody knowledgeable? Definitely to study the Quran is good to study with a teacher. The Prophet ﷺ took it from a teacher. علمه شديد القوة. That he was taught by Jibreel alayhi salam. The Prophet had talaqi. The Prophet taught. So Quran is taken with talaqi. I'm in no way encouraging, removing talaqi. But despite that, you can study the Quran. You can read it. You can think about it. You have to know your limitations. But most of you, everybody here is literate. You can read. There's commentaries that you have access to now that you didn't have access to before. You can study things in English. You can get things out. You just have to know your limitations. That's all. But it's good. And I think Muslims should encourage study groups of the Quran. You said you need to study Arabic to appreciate the Quran. Listen, I know there are Ajamis that appreciate the Quran far more than a lot of people that speak Arabic. So I'm not saying that they don't have access to the spiritual impact that the Quran can have on the heart, which is not merely at that meaning level of the intellect, because there are lights in the Quran. The Quran, Imam Malik said real knowledge is not a lot of information. It's a light that God thrust into the heart. And there are Ajam that don't speak any Arabic that have had illumination. Their hearts have been illuminated. So that's undeniable. But our religion is a religion of study also. We're committed to study. And studying Arabic is a great endeavor. And it's a very rich thing to do. So can I do the minoring in Arabic at a university here? You can certainly learn a certain type of Arabic at universities. There's even some that have specialized courses in Jahili Arabic, but in the end, to really learn Quranic Arabic, if you want to go deep into it, you have to study within the tradition, with the masters of the tradition. Grammar, rhetoric need to be studied with people that really know these things. I do not mean to be blasphemous in any way, but when it's said that rhetoric in the Quran is perfect, how can such a thing be said if the Quran is the basis and origin of rhetoric? No, the Quran is not the basis of rhetoric. The Arabs were great orators before Islam. In fact, that's one of the proofs of the Quran, is that it came down right at the pinnacle of Arabic. Arabic achieved its pinnacle. So God prepared these people linguistically what a coincidence that at the point they reach their rhetorical prowess, the Quran comes down and they're ready to recognize it. Had it come before, they wouldn't have, or later when the language becomes a degraded language, like modern Arabic. Arabic's been degraded for a long time. Like all languages, English is very degraded. We don't say thou and thee anymore. Thou and thee are much higher ways of speaking because they're more accurate. So language by its nature declines. And then we're moving into text-based language, happy signs and you are, and right? Pretty soon we'll, be completely just like grunting. And some people already are. I mean, I meet people out there and it's amazing what's happening. Language is a high thing. And the most primitive languages now are some of the most sophisticated languages. So language is not about civilization. If you take Aboriginal people, their languages are highly sophisticated languages. Oral cultures have highly sophisticated language. Many of them have highly sophisticated oral traditions. So this is not about a kind of snobbishness. The illiterate Arabs had much, much higher vocabularies than the most literate Arabs of today. So language is not simply about literacy. And some of the most eloquent, rhetorically effective people in this culture have traditionally been people that were not literate people. I mean, if you read some of the Native American speeches from the 19th century, stunning expressions because they had very high levels of eloquence in their language. Same is true in the African American community. John Taylor Gatto told me he taught in Harlem. He's a Italian-American award-winning teacher, but he taught in Harlem, and he taught in some of the best schools in New York. And he told me he felt that African Americans actually had a much finer sense of the beauties of language, alliteration, and which is why I'm not a big fan of rap, but there's definitely a level of linguistic sophistication in that type of linguistic expression. And some of it does achieve very high levels of rhetorical punch. Some of it's just, rubbish. I mean, that's... Imam al-Ghazali, the name of his book is Jawahir al-Quran. In reference to the Quran, you explained that what you meant by you understand the meaning, but the meaning hasn't moved you. What I meant is that you can understand the meanings of Quran. In other words, what these individual verses are saying. Like there are Christian Arabs who know Quranic Arabic better than many, many Muslims, but the Quran doesn't move them because they don't have the meaning of the Quran, that the Quran is the book of Allah, that it is Kalam Allah. That meaning is not in their hearts when they're reading the meanings of the Quran, just at that one level of what it means. That's what I meant. So an ajam, my point is that somebody from India or from Turkey, or they might not understand the meanings of the individual ayahs, but they know the meaning of the book. And that's what's affecting them. Is the universal meaning of the Quran, not the particular meanings that are embedded in the Quran, the universal meaning of the Quran. And that's why so many people will, in Ramadan, pray 20 rakats, and you'll see people weeping from that, and they don't even know what's being said, but they're being moved by the meaning of that universal meaning. That was my point. Ulu. What does ulu mean? Ulu. Ulu is like ulaika. It's those. It's a type of it's in the idafa construct there. So ulul absar are the possessors of, the ones that possess something. So it's in an idafa construct. But it comes out of a way of identifying a group of people. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah open the Quran up to our hearts and open our hearts to the Quran. اللهم اجعل هذا القرآن ربيع قلوبنا وجلاء أحزاننا وهمومنا وذهاب همومنا وغمومنا
يا أرحم الراحمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.